and gentlemen, welcome back to another exciting edition of Drinks with the Major and the Captain. This is Major Cosmo Taormina. Of course, my name is Captain Stephen Lieberman. And as my commanding officer has already suggested, one of the reasons that you do not see us in uniform right now is that we are probably going to be speaking ill of our commander-in-chief. All right, it's sort of the nature of the business, and it would be inappropriate for us to be in our service uniforms and doing so. Yet we can still maintain our rank when discussing and, of course, smoking cigars.
Yes.
So, typically speaking, we try to do these little drinks with the major and the captain, usually about once a quarter. Right. Every so often there's a big law case or there's a piece of legislation that comes out that we feel warrants sort of an immediate drinks with the major and the captain. Now, about a week and a half ago, we had Young versus Hawaii. They came out, and many of you were on that call when we did the drinks with the major and the captain. Last week, President Biden announced his, and I put it in air quotes, executive actions for gun control. We felt that this would also necessitate another drinks with the major and the captain. So we're going to go through them. We're going to talk about them and talk about whether or not they have any chance of actually coming to law, and then kind of moving forward on that.
In essence, it's the Californization of the federal government. You can see that all these policies, with the exception of the immunity granted by the federal government to gun manufacturers, the limited immunity from certain types of lawsuits, and we'll clarify that up, is basically all of California's stupid now trying to be spread statewide. We're going to take all that manure out of California and spread it all the way to the East Coast.
Well, let's talk about, to begin with, let's talk about what an executive action is, because there's a lot of confusion about this. All right. So as you all know, there's three branches of government. We've got our judicial branch of government, our executive branch of government, and our legislative branch of government. Working properly, the legislative branch of government is supposed to make law. The executive branch of government is there exclusively to execute laws that have been developed by the legislative branch. Now, there are certain instances where the government just simply has to act so quickly because of an existential threat to it that the legislative branch is just simply not going to be in a position to be recalled to vote on a piece of legislation or something like that. So for emergency powers, we allow what we call executive actions. We also allow executive actions to the extent that these executive actions help clarify existing law. So let's say, for the sake of argument, Major Taormina is in the executive branch of government. I'm in the legislative branch of government. And we pass a law that says all chairs have to be at least 72 inches in height or something to that effect. Okay. Well, it's now up to Cosmo to actually enforce this law. The question is, what exactly is a chair? Is a chair a bar stool? Is a chair a high chair? Is a chair an automobile vehicle? Is a chair something that we're sitting in right now, right? So there's sort of an inherent vagueness associated with that law, and he's allowed to, go ahead.
Well, that dovetails nicely into the case, Chevron case out of the United States Supreme Court that said administrative executive agencies are allowed to interpret the law and promulgate regulations based upon what they think, and this is where it gets subjective and mushy, the legislature meant when they were promulgating the law. That is, the law's out, it's a chair. Then you would look at the Department of Regulation or Department of the Interior, whoever's in charge of that, and they would say, okay, we're going to define a chair as something you can sit on. And then we would say, well, wait a minute, you're talking about a planner. Because that constitute a chair? What about things that are not meant to be chairs that are suddenly now used as chairs, like sitting on this table? Would that then be a chair? Well, the Chevron case really gave too much discretion to the administrative agencies, and there's been a lot of backlash, which is why the choice as to who is going to head up the ATF is the big problem now, because we have a gun grabber who's going to be in charge of that agency.
Actually, I would say, I mean, more specific, so Mr. Chipman, it's not just that he's a gun grabber. He actually has some blood on his hands. This was the special agent in charge during the Waco siege. And he's famous for saying that the people that were inside of that compound were using 50 caliber rifles to bring down helicopters that the Department of Public Safety, the Texas Department of Public Safety had flown. There is obviously no record of any helicopters being shot down by any Branch Davidians. He made this up out of whole cloth. So he's got a legitimate truth. But like I said, I want to stay on this executive action thing here for a second, because again, it's important to remember that it's the legislative branch that promulgates laws. And here's the kicker, okay? Contrary to what a lot of people believe, it's kind of tough to pass a law, right? Making laws is difficult. It requires horse trading. It requires legislative analysis. Oftentimes, the kind of law that I would like to promulgate, I'm not going to be able to get the votes for it because it is too restrictive on freedom, all right? Our founders built in this difficult process in order to pass laws, because laws by definition restrict human freedom, okay? If we now can sit there and say, well, the executive branch of government can now start effectively making its own laws through the executive order process, essentially saying, well, we think that Congress might have acted on this, but they chose not to, and that's good enough for us. We're going to go ahead and we're going to move forward with this. This becomes extraordinarily problematic. It's problematic on the Second Amendment level, obviously, and that's what we're discussing. But this can extend throughout the entire concept of our republic. All right, if they can sit there and they can say, we're going to bypass the legislature in order to pass what effectively is law, all right, on this particular area, we could do that on anything from securities trading to property ownership to you name it.
Okay? You're seeing it happen in California. The California Supreme Court has become nothing more than a super legislature. The General Dynamics case, which destroyed the gig economy, which basically replaced the old Bourdain test with a three-part test they just made up out of whole cloth, changed facially the entire economy of California, and they're trying to spread that nationwide.
You're talking about what defines an independent contractor.
What defines an independent contractor versus an employee? The old Bourdain test required a 21-point factor, evenly weighted. No factor was more dispositive than any other, and that's been now replaced with a three-factor ABC test that the California Supreme Court made up out of whole cloth. The point of doing that was to bring everybody out of the gig economy, i.e., the cash economy, and make them all employees, because that forces employers to pay workman's comp insurance. It forces employers to pay payroll taxes
and labor union dues.
And more importantly, for the state, everybody now has their income on W-2 forms, and it's very difficult to hide any cash. It's very difficult to cheat your taxes, per se. And that's what's been happening here in California. They've been doing it over and over again. The governor's office was basically over at the California Supreme Court. Representatives from both the Supreme Court and the governor's office were talking all about the COVID restrictions and how they were going to change and modify all the rules of court and all the speedy due process deadlines that were being suspended because of COVID. Well, what's supposed to happen, that's all supposed to come from the legislature. They're supposed to get together in session, stay up all night for 2, 3, 4 days, come up with a whole raft of legislation to extend all these deadlines. And then while they're being extended, the rest of us as citizens are like, hey, we don't like that. File a lawsuit against us, file a lawsuit against them, those laws, which are ultimately decided to be unconstitutional after the Supreme Court's done it by either the California Supreme Court or federal Supreme Court or wherever it happens to be. So they can say, look, you overstepped your grounds. This was not right to do. But the crisis has passed at that point. The built-in delay
out of the bottle.
Yeah, but the built-in delay in litigating those things from the time the legislature puts them into action, the governor signs them, and they're litigated fully and thoroughly through the courts, the crisis will have passed. They didn't do that this time. If you notice, we had dictates coming directly from the California Supreme Court suspending due process. A lot of you who own property know that you cannot evict a tenant anymore because they're not paying. That's unconstitutional. Your property's being, in essence, stolen from you or forced lease from you by the government. The government's now saying you cannot act on the contract to enforce the rent payment.
The point of the matter is,
it's unconstitutional. Yeah. Only the feds can do that.
Yeah, and we saw this, right? We saw this even with the election, where we had constitutional requirements that state legislatures mandate how elections be run, but you had essentially the judicial system taking place and making these arguments. In any event, we see at the federal level, we see Joe Biden sit there and say, okay, we need to do something about this rampant scourge of gun violence. All right. And clearly, since the legislature has not taken up the mantle, forget the fact that they've got all these ridiculous bills pending before Congress, I am going to go ahead and I'm going to unilaterally instruct the Justice Department to enact certain things. Okay. And the things that he chooses to enact are really freaking odd. Okay. And we're going to go through them here in just a couple of minutes. But one thing that he does say before going into it, he articulates that the biggest thing that he thinks is problematic in the United States, and this is, again, I want you to think about this as an elected representative talking about a business, all right? Not only just simply a business, but one that actually has constitutional protections built directly into it. He says, gun manufacturers cannot be sued, all right? They can't be sued. They enjoy this blanket immunity from all civil liability, right? That is what we call a lie. He flat out lied. Gun manufacturers do have specific immunity when it comes to their products being used improperly to cause harm to third parties,
i.e. the mass shooter.
Yeah.
Everybody tried. There was an episode of, or excuse me, there was an edition of The Shield where I put forth the Bushmaster case, where a Bushmaster rifle was used in the Sandy Hook shooting. And so the parents of Sandy Hook sued Bushmaster rifles, saying that they were intentionally marketing this rifle to the mass shooters.
Think of it this way. Think of somebody driving an automobile into a crowd of individuals. And then the plaintiffs, the people that were injured or the families of the people that died, sue Ford for manufacturing this vehicle.
An assault truck. Who needs an assault truck?
Literally. I mean, yeah, exactly. Who needs, 8 cylinders at this point in our life, right?
Yeah.
Essentially, it could bankrupt Ford. And there is a utility. There is a public utility in having these manufacturers making these products. Well, guess what? The same thing exists in the firearms community as well. Not only is there a utility by having a robust manufacturing market for firearms for the United States military, but there is also a utility because we've got this pesky little thing called the Second Amendment, right? Where individuals have a specifically enumerated fundamental right. And if they bankrupt the industry, make it commercially impossible for that industry to exist, then individuals are not going to be able to exercise their Second Amendment rights, and the entire nation theoretically becomes jeopardized as a result of essentially a disarmed military.
So the issue was always a bunch of people who were irritated or angry with the gun manufacturers because of the mass shooting, decided they could sue. They had no chance of success, but they still did it anyway. And as we know, as lawyers, it's very expensive to do litigation. Attorney's fees can run into the tens of millions of dollars, even fighting a meritless case, which is exactly what the problem was. So the gift from George Bush the Younger was to allow firearms manufacturers to be immune from these kinds of suits. It was basically a very narrow restriction that says you can't sue a firearms manufacturer for the intentional misuse of their property.
But wait a minute, counselor, wait a minute. If I go and I buy a Remington shotgun and I'm shooting it at the range and it blows up and rips my face to shreds, are you saying that I cannot sue Remington for their mismanagement?
Good point there, the good captain. The answer is no. You still may be able to sue, or you still can sue Remington for a defective product, defective manufacturer. All of those protections are still inured to the consumer. The manufacturer must produce a commercially viable firearm.
So are you telling me then that the president of the United States stood before the American people and lied to them?
As a matter of fact, I am.
And this is a member of the United States military, I might add. Okay. Anyways.
California State Guard. Yeah.
Anyway, fact of the matter is.
Which is why we're not in uniform.
Fact of the matter is he flat out lied. Okay. In fact, it was so bad that the New York Times The New York frickin' Times actually published an article saying that the president of the United States completely botched the entire statement, all right, and ended up essentially fact checking them. Now, here's the thing. If the New York Times calls you out about lying, about trying to push gun control, you know you've got a major problem on your hands. Now, in any event,
pun intended.
Yeah, after the at the end of his completely mind-boggling speech, he turns the microphone over to Attorney General Merrick Garland. Keep in mind, this is the guy that almost sat on the Supreme Court.
We dodged a bullet on that
Literally,
one. Boy,
intended.
did we dodge a bullet on that one. Holy tomatoes. This guy is out to lunch.
So he ends up saying, okay, we are going to have, and I've got them written down here, we are going to go ahead and we are going to push through 5 separate agenda items, which, like I say, fall under the rubric of executive actions, all right? But essentially, he's instructing the ATF to do certain things. Now, the first thing that he says is we're going to go ahead and we're going to develop a robust firearms trafficking tracing system. Now, honestly, I have no idea what the hell he's talking about.
Translation, they're going to try to do a national gun registry.
That's the only thing that can possibly be articulated, because the fact of the matter is that the vast majority of firearms are effectively traced. All right, one of the guns that are manufactured from traditional gun manufacturers have a process where they go from manufacturer to distributor. Once they go to the distributor, the information on that firearm is recorded in what's called an A&D book. Once the distributor sends it to a gun dealer, it goes into an A&D book. And once the dealer sells the gun, it goes into an A&D book. Now, theoretically speaking, there are some states where individuals could private party transfer firearms without the use of an FFL. But we are talking about an incredibly small number of firearms transactions. So essentially what they're looking for is a solution to a problem, right?
Here's the issue. You guys remember Operation Fast and Furious under the Obama administration, where Eric Holder's Justice Department sold a bunch of firearms to Mexican drug cartels, and one of those firearms was used to kill a Border Patrol agent?
How did we find out about it?
How did we find out about
Because
that?
of the gun tracing system.
Exactly.
Right. So yeah,
it's perfectly accurate for the good captain's statement. This is a solution in search of a problem. And the only thing that makes any sense is they're going to come after us and ask us to register our firearms.
Now, the second thing he talked about is a little bit more problematic. Talked about ghost guns. Sure. Now, this is where, former Senator De Leon actually, believe it or not, sort of got it right. Okay. Up until very recently, when I talk about very recently, I'm talking about this press conference, because the very concept of what a firearm is may theoretically have changed based on this press conference. Up until that conference, a firearm was defined as the serialized receiver. So when we talk about ghost guns, what they are normally referring to are 80% firearms, or firearms that fall even below the 80% mark. Okay.
Build kits.
Yeah. Well, no. Not just a build kit. Okay. But an actual receiver, a billet. Okay. So if I were to go to industrial metal supply and I were to buy a chunk of aluminum, okay, that by definition cannot be construed as a firearm, even though I have the intent to mill it out and turn it into an AR-15 lower receiver. Right now, it's just simply a chunk of metal. As I start the manufacturing process, that chunk of metal starts going through a percentage change as it gets closer and closer to being a full-fledged firearm. When it crosses the threshold of being 80% complete, it suddenly becomes a recognizable firearm pursuant to the United States government. Okay. And as a result of that, it has to be serialized and everything else. Now, the guns that individuals manufacturers on their own without any intent to sell, you've always been allowed to do that. That's been within the purview of an individual's right to keep and bear arms. If you tried to sell it, that'd be a problem in and of itself, but you were always allowed to manufacture it all on your own. What he was referring to is what the major just said: build kits. Most build kits not only come with an 80% lower receiver, it also comes along with secondary hardware, collapsible stock, an upper receiver, the internals for the fire control systems and things like that.
That's if you're building an AR. If you were going to build an AK-47, you start off with sheet metal. All you need is the folding or the machine folding. Sorry, I'm forgetting the angle.
Yeah.
The machine that actually folds the sheet metal in the certain ways so that it actually can become a receiver. Those things start out with absolutely no parts. There is no 80% receiver. It's just a flat piece of steel, sheet metal. And then of course, they sell you the barrel and that foregrip and the stock and the rest of the furniture and the springs and the trigger assembly and all that good stuff. But the receiver is just a piece of sheet metal.
So we were always listening to the anti-gun crowd talk about these ghost guns, and we always knew that they were referring to 80% lower receivers. But in this press conference, he starts referring to all of those secondary parts. He's talking about the upper receivers. He's talking about all the springs and bolts and everything else. This would suggest that they are now going to start. In fact, when the regulations get promulgated in 30 days, it might be construed that all of the secondary parts that are up to this point unregulated suddenly do become regulated, a la California's new law dealing with precursor parts. So effectively speaking, it looks as though the Attorney General is looking to California's law on precursor parts, going to promulgate that law nationwide outside of the federal legislature, effectively saying, look, I've got dictatorial powers. I'm just going to do it.
All right. Take the analysis from the Ninth Circuit and apply it to the entire country. You can't even get to a constitutional analysis unless you show there's no historical precedent of discrimination or infringement.
So it's a massive state of potential overreach on the part of that one. Then he talks about stabilizing braces. Okay. So when you think about all of the thousands of crimes that have been committed over the years with AR style pistols using stabilizing braces as a way of getting around having a stock and having an SBR, you think of the lives that were lost because of these nefarious weapons. All right. They are going to close that. All right. I mean, this is, to me, this is, I mean, such a disingenuous argument, right? You know, they've gone back and forth, and literally speaking, you know, the argument effectively is, we don't like short-barreled rifles because we think they look dangerous. We have no empirical evidence to suggest that they're any more dangerous than anything else, but we don't like the look of them. And we really don't like the fact that enterprising engineers effectively developed a workaround against the short-barreled rifle. So, you know what? Our argument to you, rather than going through a whole legislative process and get these things actually made illegal on a federal level, we're just going to say, fuck you. We're going to do it completely on our own. Okay.
Under Obama's ATF administration, they said if you took a SIG arm brace and put it on an AR pistol and then mounted or raised it to your shoulder and used that brace to shoot, you have effectively redesigned the weapon and converted it into a short barrel rifle. If you kept it on your arm, you're okay. But if you took it off your arm and then put it on your shoulder, you've redesigned it. That went away under Trump's ATF, and now it's back.
And here's the thing. Of all these things, okay, this one might be the one that actually screws them the most, the administration. Okay. Think about it this way. We have a federal law. The federal law is the American with Disabilities Act. Okay. You have a manufacturer who says, we are going to develop a medical device that allows individuals that require adaptive means the ability to shoot a pistol by using this arm brace.
That was the whole impetus behind the design of the SIG arm brace.
So we literally have a legislative statute that says you can do this, right? You now have an executive action that directly targets the Americans with Disability Act. All right, this takes unconstitutional to an entirely new realm.
Okay. Even the Ninth Circuit could save this one.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. So,
although they'll try. They'll give us they'll give us a 400-page opinion saying it really is not a constitutional question, doesn't fall under the Second Amendment. And more importantly, it doesn't even affect the ADA because it's really not meant to help anybody.
Yeah.
You really don't have a right to a firearm, any firearm. Therefore, this can't be part of the protections it covers.
But here's the thing, and this is a part that's so kind of cool about this particular one, and the fact that we have tyrannical overreach. Okay. You guys have all heard me talk about strict scrutiny and looking for a court case that can get before the Supremes that would be able to articulate a requirement that there be a strict scrutiny analysis or something akin to a strict scrutiny analysis when looking at a constitutional question involving the Second Amendment. We don't have that yet. All right.
We just might now.
The problem is that all the cases that are making their ways towards the Supremes are all based around behavioral things. Okay. Can you do X? Can you go to this location? Okay. And, arguably speaking, there really has been restrictions on the right to bear arms throughout our really human history. I mean, we have said, look, yeah, you can carry a sword in public, but you can't carry a sword to the coronation of the king. We've had these minor restrictions on that, and the left would tell you that that was like completely blanketed and essentially tried to disarm the populace, and that's patently false. But we have always had these behavioral based restrictions. Okay. This one is purely hardware. This is essentially saying this is a type of weapon we are not going to allow you to own. Okay. And this is going to squarely fall within a true Second Amendment analysis. And the court is going to have that ability to sit there and say, since we're actually analyzing the scope of the Second Amendment as it applies to hardware, we are now going to articulate that you have to use a strict scrutiny analysis. So
that's what we're hoping.
We're hoping, and it would be pure, delicious irony that it was the Biden's administration's attempt to push through unconstitutional restrictions, which actually provided us with a vehicle to open up the Second Amendment and overturn most of these anti-gun pieces of legislation. So
some might say that that's the karmic wheel finally turning in a full 360 degree.
And I think it's a real possibility. I mean, do you agree with my analysis?
I do agree with the analysis. Okay, because it doesn't regulate behavior. It basically says we'll take a legal item, an AR pistol. If you put this brace for it, which was originally designed and intended for people who are disabled, who could only use one arm, you now have created an illegal weapon. But that's not what it was for. And it falls directly in the crosshairs of both the ADA and the Second Amendment.
All right. Now, the second to last one has to do with what he's referring to as model red flag laws. Yeah. All right. So the idea being that some states have red flag laws, some states don't have red flag laws. We want to create sort of a national model red flag program so that all these respective states can jump on it. So I have an opinion on these red flag laws. I'm curious to hear what the major has to say about this, whether he disagrees with me. I think, pardon me.
I'll give you a little history of the red flag laws while he's choking to death over here. Have another drink. The red flag laws simply allow someone, a third party, to notify authorities and bring a court action that will deprive the person who they think is a threat of their firearms rights. Simple and easily.
And you know
that
what?
list has been ever expanded. It used to just be people who knew the person that they want to restrain, close family member. Then it expanded to neighbors. Then it's expanded to teachers. Then it's expanded to coworkers. Now it's expanded to random dude on the street who got upset because you posted a meme that they didn't enjoy.
But let's think about this for a second, okay? Let's think about the liability that comes with reporting, okay? So understand red flag laws have always existed, okay? Literally, from the time there were cops, there were what effectively amounted to red flag laws, right? If I was sitting in my home and I was looking through my window like Mrs. Kravitz in Bewitched, and I thought that somebody in the house across the street was engaged in odd behavior, weird conduct, something just didn't seem right, I would call the police. I would be referred to as a confidential informant. And I would sit there and I would say, yeah, you know what? The neighbor across the street, I don't know, she wiggles her nose and weird shit happens. Okay. And you know what? I think that you guys should probably investigate. Well, that is enough to generate reasonable suspicion. If nothing else, it allows the cops to make what effectively is a welfare check, to check to make sure that everybody in the home is okay, because we got this strange report. Well, as the cop is talking to the person at that house, they get to make essentially an independent decision. Does this individual appear to harbor some sort of mental defective level that would require his, protection against himself? And with that, a loss of his firearms. Okay. They essentially are acting as sort of a proto mental health care professional. Now, that analysis doesn't end with them, right? They're going to take this individual into custody. They're going to bring them before an actual medical professional. And then that medical professional will make an independent decision as to whether or not this is somebody who needs to be institutionalized or needs to have ongoing psychiatric care or whatever. Irrespective of all that, the guns are now gone. All right, for a minimum of 5 days, potentially for the rest of their life, all generated by one single phone. Now, if that cop acted in bad faith, okay, basically was like, look, you're completely healthy, you're totally normal, but you know what, I don't particularly like you for one reason or another, so I'm going to just make your life miserable. I'm going to go ahead and haul you off before this medical examiner, take your guns and go through that process. Then that cop is potentially subject to Fourth Amendment violations and civil remedies because he acted outside the scope of the Constitution. All right, so liability stayed on the department and on that cop individually. All right, as a result of this action. Red flag laws do nothing more than shift liability from the law enforcement agency and the city or the municipality and onto the individual who made the phone call. All right, Cosmo sits there and calls the cops and says, you know what, my law partner, guy's losing his freaking mind. Okay, you better go over there and talk to him. And by the way, I know he has guns. Cops come to my house. They knock on my door and they say, Mr. Lieberman, you have been notified pursuant to a red flag law. We're taking you in for a psychological evaluation and we're taking your guns. I'm like, well, but do you think I'm crazy? No, actually, we don't. We think you're totally sane, but it's out of our hands. All right. We're just basically muscle at this point. You may have a legitimate civil claim. All right. But you can't sue us. You got to sue him. All right. So literally, that's all it did. It just basically transferred liability, but that's, do you agree with that?
I do agree. It is rather silly, except for I'd love to see the lawsuit against that. I'd love to see a lawsuit against the reporting person and how they try to claim a litigation privilege or something of the nature. And then they would have to probably carve out. Yeah. Well, they probably have. Yeah. They probably have to carve out some kind of exemption for people who were honestly mistaken or just.
No, it's malicious. It's that's what we end up finding, right? It was the ex-wife, the ex-wife, the ex-boyfriend.
Sure, but that's been done before in family law court. If anybody who's ever gone into family law court knows those kinds of things often turn out to be nothing. I mean, divorce cases with child custody issues always have one parent saying that to a court that he touches the children funny, she takes the kids out of the country. Those kinds of things have always been litigated, and the reporting party never suffers any backlash or harsh for it.
Yeah, unless, of course, it starts to manifest now because you won't be able to sue the law enforcement agency. Or not that these things typically involve litigation, but it does push that liability out. And I definitely will tell you that the amount of insurance proceeds that our premiums that the cities and municipalities are having to pay is reduced every time a red flag law is put into place. So you're going to see that again. I'm not sure what that actually does. Well, I will tell you one thing it does. It creates a fundraising opportunity on our side, because every single time another state adopts a red flag law, the NRA, the Firearms Policy Coalition, and all these other organizations send out these, Armageddon emails saying, that our gun rights are about to be taken from us. You need to give us $50. Okay. So I guess in that respect, we could thank Biden for transferring more money to pro-gun organizations.
The karmic wheel keeps turning.
The last one is really interesting. And for somebody like us at Artemis, it's a real potential irony. Merrick Garland announces.
I'll give you the
yes,
cynical
yeah,
version
yeah.
after he's done.
So Merrick Garland says, we are going to earmark $1 billion for community enhancement of gun safety. All right. Very little information as to what this is, but essentially he says we're going to use non-governmental partners. Well, actually, that would seem to exclude law enforcement at that point. But
If
we're
in
going
fact it's
yeah,
non-governmental
yeah,
partners.
but it says non-governmental partners to help minimize the possibility of firearms, deaths or injuries or things like that. And I heard that and I thought, well, let's think about this from an empirical standpoint. The number one way of preventing an individual from injuring or killing somebody with a firearm is through training. All right. Whether it's just introductory training on basic gun safety, a la Eddie Eagle, and things like that through the National Rifle Association, all the way up to advanced firearms training and actual, use and mastery at skill at arms. Irregardless of all of those different types of things, the Artemis Defense Institute is really the country's premier firearms training institution. And the only thing that limits us in our ability to be able to promulgate our message of firearms training and the essential nature of becoming a master at skill at arms is capitalization. So while we have been looking for investors to be able to, grow beyond our current location, I'm thinking we're just going to go directly after the federal government, right? Thank you, Attorney General Merrick Garland. We want a major chunk of that cheddar. And in fact, it's not just us. Okay, we want to help the NRA get a major chunk of that money for its Eddie Eagle program. We want to make sure that other training institutions are able to get the bulk of that money. Okay. Now, when the Biden administration says, holy crap, what's happening? We've got all of these pro-gun groups asking us for this money. Well, start denying them. Okay. Just go ahead and deny them altogether. All right. Well, now we have the real possibility of a federal civil rights case, because now we've got a violation of the equal protection laws, which would cause what we call a 1983 action and then a 1984 payout, which means
or
that
Title VII claim.
Yeah, so Cosmo and I would be able to make money on the whole deal. You guys wouldn't make anything, but hey, at the end of the day,
now
it's all about us.
Yeah. The cynic in me says this is the Fund Every Town for Gun Safety Act.
Yeah.
This is the
That's what it's
fund
designed
the Brady
for.
design.
Yeah.
This is the fund, the Southern Poverty Law Center, because those agencies will somehow miraculously qualify for this funds. Or it can also be viewed, if they actually default to government regulation, this will be the backdoor way to fund the police departments from the cuts they're going to receive in the public eye. Saying, yeah, we're going to defund the police, but we're going to give you a couple $100 million for gun safety and education to do those buyback programs. And if you happen to use the rest of the funds to pad your budget that's been cut because of the defunding, well, no, never mind to us. We defunded the police. See how good we did? That's the cynic in me talking. And I think that's very likely what's going to happen.
I think you might see that. I mean, you definitely might see that.
It's more likely than not under the legal standard.
Anyways, at the end of the day, that's what those 5 executive actions, and like I said at the beginning of this whole thing, I'm not really sure that we can legitimately call them executive actions, but that notwithstanding, that's what the 5 things come down to. Now, you do have, there was a call by the Biden administration for legislative movement on certain anti-gun programs. I did see a movement to federally make standard capacity magazines illegal. Now, again, that goes back to a hardware instance, and I think that's ripe for a Supreme Court review. But notwithstanding that, you really haven't seen a lot of movement on the federal level, in legislative level, on guns. One of the reasons for that, I truly believe, I'm going to have to actually do the full analysis on this, But today I saw a report that we got another member of the House of Representatives, which according to this news report now brings the balance of power in the House of Representatives to two, right? Two Democratic representatives that essentially create control of the House. We already know that the Senate is a 50-50 split. So the Democrats' hold on power is extraordinarily tenuous, all right, with the extremely high probability that we're going to end up having Republican control at the really in a matter of months. Okay.
Which is why there's been over 50 executive actions. Simply put,
got to
they
get it done
don't
now.
have,
Got to get it done now.
they got to get it done now because they don't have the votes. They don't have the political will.
Well,
and a
also,
lot of those Democrats are in swing states and they don't want to lose their seat over a hot button gun issue because that's really what it comes down
well, and
to.
you'll never see Joe Manchin vote for this. And you also, you know, ultimately speaking, I think there's a real strong possibility that you may see post the turn of the House and the turn of the Senate, the same type of, you know, abuse of the impeachment process against Trump being used against Biden, you know, as a result of, you know, Chinagate and everything else. So it's entirely conceivable that you know, they really have nothing more than about a year, if even that, to be able to do the things that they're trying to do, irrespective of what the court's ultimately going to come up with. All right. Well, with all that being said, that brings us to 15 minutes before we call it an adjournment. So, Sandy, we're going to open it up for questions and answers. And I've been seeing the chat box constantly rotating, although we obviously can't read it from where we are sitting right here. So if you will be the voice of the people and
for your Q&A section, a number of states, Texas, Idaho, Tennessee, etc., have initiated a number of flavors of law, from laws that limit federal enforcement of gun control and a particular state to all the way to 2A sanctuary states. What is your take on the effectiveness of this, and what could happen when there is a showdown of state versus feds?
Brilliant question. And I thank you for getting that out right at the very beginning. So there's two separate
We've been
things.
going on and on about this for a long time.
This one's awesome. Okay. So there's two separate things that are in play here. One took place in South Carolina, which I find to be a really interesting aspect. I don't think it would have any effect in California, but essentially in South Carolina, they have said all residents of the state that fall between age 18 and 45 fall into what is referred to as the unorganized militia. Every state has this. It's pursuant to the United States law, U.S. code. All right, you guys are all member of the unorganized militia. We are members of the organized militia. That being said, there's this bill before the legislature in South Carolina that says that the AR-15 is the specified weapon of the unorganized militia of the state of South Carolina, which means any federal restriction on the acquisition for an individual to get an AR-15 would by definition be a violation of the Constitution, irregardless of how you interpret the Second Amendment or anything else. That's really cool. I don't know that it has any effect in California, but it's an interesting thing. The bigger question, the one that has actually direct application to the California, are two things that the I would say the pro 10th Amendment crowd, although they certainly wouldn't have envisioned themselves this way, acted during the Trump administration when it came to marijuana and when it came to illegal aliens, right? They essentially said, look, we are going to define ourselves as a sanctuary state. We are going to simply ignore federal edicts as it relates to illegal aliens. In fact, we're going to make it difficult for federal law enforcement officers to do their job in arresting illegal aliens and doing things like that. When it comes to marijuana, we're just simply going to ignore it. I mean, we're just literally going to pretend as though any federal restriction on marijuana is gone. All right. And all of these other states started to follow suit. What was interesting is that under the Obama administration, the DEA was told, stand down, don't do anything about it. Let's just allow this to happen. Okay.
The scary thing could be that the enforcement mechanism that the feds would use would be the Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah, that would
Because
be
those are the only federal officers that would be authorized to operate within the continental United States, because the military can't. Posse
U.S.
Comitatus.
Marshals.
U.S. Marshals, but they've been so
Yeah,
watered
FBI,
down
yeah,
and disbanded. They're really not.
Well,
anything.
and realistically speaking, for an operation of this magnitude, it would require what essentially is a mobilizing force. You know,
Most importantly, they would have to prosecute them individually, which requires an enormous amount of time and resources on behalf of the feds. In essence, it would turn the United States Attorney's Office into its own district attorney's office, where they'd have to dedicate people and resources and custody space to prosecuting people who didn't do something with their firearms, didn't register,
let's talk about it, right? So federal government enacts 2,000 gun courts across the country,
right?
With a attendant judge, an attendant prosecutor, and it's
Defense
just to mill these guys through,
and marshals and jail space to do this.
Yeah,
stuff.
so I mean, it could theoretically happen, but effectively,
enormous cost.
Yeah, the Arizona and a number of other states have already passed laws that effectively mimic California's or pro-marijuana stance. Where they're essentially saying we're going to negate federal law. Now, on the one hand, I think this is very cool, right? I love the idea of states acting as sovereign nations, which is really what they were, okay, and really reasserting their 10th Amendment rights as the Constitution originally envisioned. All right, so there's a lot sort of philosophically that I'm very in favor of when it comes to this.
Your libertarian is showing.
Yeah, exactly. There are some legitimate, what I would say, sort of structural problems that are associated with this. And I don't blame the pro-gun crowd on this one. I think the anti-gun crowd has botched it up so bad. A society requires predictability in order to function. The one mechanism that provides predictability is the judicial system. If you have a non-partial and structurally, sacrosanct judicial system, it allows for robust economic development. It allows for people to engage in the risk of contract formation. There's a lot of inherent benefits when you have what people look at as being a predictable judiciary. When the judiciary effectively sits there and says, we're going to just completely sway to the political winds, and we're going to do whatever is necessary to achieve these objectives, the entire judiciary comes into a suspect, and reliance on the judiciary comes. I mean, think about it for a second. Why do you think these cryptocurrencies actually have any degree of validity? 20 years ago, these would have been laughed at. Okay, a currency that's based on a mathematical equation that has absolutely no inherent benefit whatsoever. It exists in a computer screen, and yet the reason the cryptocurrencies are gaining momentum is because people are losing faith and value in the predictability of the governments that are actually controlling the monetary supply. All right, so like I said, on the libertarian part of me, I'm kind of in favor of it. From a societal integrity standpoint,
it's an interesting conundrum is what it is. It really is. And ultimately speaking, the states can simply look at the federal government and say, that's the law you want, you enforce it.
Yeah.
We're going to take a hands-off approach. That's the short answer to the question. Everybody's given up on California. That's the problem. We keep leaving the state. And those of us who want to stay because we love the weather, we love our friends, we love our families, we build lives here, are running away. If you keep running away from the problem, it's just going to get worse.
Here. So we stand and we fight. First of all, I do not believe that over the next 5 years, there is going to be anything, notwithstanding a Supreme Court victory in our favor, there is not going to be anything that is going to be reasonably construed as a gun-free state. Okay, those died with the last election. They just don't know that they're dead. Okay, the 10th Amendment, according to the federal government, no longer has any, actually the entire Bill of Rights no longer has any validity. But, the idea that I'm going to move from this location to another in order to be able to have better gun control rights, well, yeah, maybe for a few months. But ultimately speaking, we can see what's happening with the federal government's initiatives on, on the bills coming that effectively mimic California laws.
They're trying to do what they did in California and then make it statewide.
Yeah. So
All through the states.
I'm with Cosmo.
Mhm.
Look, we draw a line.
Mhm.
Okay. The Spartans at Thermopylae did not sit there and say, Xerxes is about to attack. Let's go to Italy. Okay. They sat there and they said, we draw a line. We stand here. All right. We do what is necessary to take our state back. All right. It may be that this state has multi-generations of liberal control. All right, from this point forward, that's entirely conceivable, but we will chink away at that wall until ultimately we regain control.
Hey, 60 years ago, California was a red state.
Mm-hmm.
And now it seems to be swinging back because that pendulum will swing. There is a recall election that's been passed. Gavin Newsom's head is on the chopping block. Whether or not the axe falls is something else to be decided, but there has been progress and it continues to be made. The more the government outreaches, the more it extends its tentacles into every aspect of life, the more the people will start fighting back. It just has to hit them where it counts. The gig economy was first. The gig economy was one of the first tentacles into the people's money, right directly into their pocketbook, forcing them to become employees when they weren't. It's starting to trickle down. It's starting to get more and more oppressive. This pandemic put us back a little bit because we gave up even more freedoms in the name of safety.
And there are more gun owners. And there are more gun owners now. In California.
And that in and of itself backfired on them too. Steve will tell you there have been a bunch of liberal people who never needed to buy a gun. Now suddenly want one. And now suddenly are in the crosshairs of the federal and the state government that says you can't have it. And here's why. You need a 10-day wait period. You need to have a safe. You need to have a lock. You need to pass a safety card check. You need to go through a background check. Oh, you're not in the database? Guess what? You can't buy ammo. Wait, what do you mean? Those laws aren't for me. They were for the criminal.
Yeah. And that causes an entire political philosophical change. So anyways, no, in answer to the question, I understand when people feel that they need to move. I get it. Okay. But no, we draw a line. We stand and we fight. All right. That's my position. Sandy.
Not to put anyone on the spot, but I know that we have somebody from LA County here that just got a CCW. Jonathan, would you like to say a couple words on your experience with this?
So yeah, I moved here in 2016, and the worst thing was I lost my Orange County CCW. And last summer, I saw that Villanueva was actually starting to issue more permits. So I talked to Steven and he said, go for it, why not? I actually put my application in and got denied in September. Figured, okay, that's good. A few weeks back, I got a call from a deputy saying, are you still interested? We pulled your application and it looks good. And, you know, are you still interested in doing this? And I said, yeah, where do I need to be? What do I need to do? And went out for the interview. They were super supportive, very pro 2A, and just finished my training over the weekend. So yeah, it's possible. And if you look on the map for CCW, they've actually turned LA County to green.
There you go.
Yay.
It's working.
That's progress.
We stand and fight and we scream and yell and cry because it wasn't more than 6 months ago that Alex Villanueva shut down all the gun stores in LA County saying they weren't essential services. And now look, he's issuing CCW permits. It can be done.
It can be done.
Jonathan lives in the Long Beach area, guys.
Yeah.
And we are in the process of getting approved. We just submitted our final exam to LA County Sheriff. So hopefully that'll turn around within the next week or so. Let's see, there were a couple of other questions. Let's see, they're also shutting down gun ranges all over California. Yes, but guys, there's also a bunch of gun ranges that we don't even know about. You know, earlier we were talking about the center left group that is jumping on the bandwagon and buying their guns. There is an entire underground organization that I just stumbled upon last night. They're out there training, but they're not affiliated with any of the Republican groups. They've started their own organization, and we'll be reaching out to them shortly. Stephen, did you want to say anything about them?
Yeah, you know what, the fact of the matter is, and you know, a lot of times people would come to me and, you know, they would say, oh, well, you know, you're a conservative. And I'd have to correct him. Like, no, Sandy's a conservative. Okay. I mean, Sandy's legitimately politically conservative. Okay. I fall into what I call myself a classical liberal.
It's the
okay?
Jesuit education. His
Yeah,
Catholic is
that's
showing.
it. Yeah, you could, you know, I mean,
His Catholic is showing.
my
you
Catholic
know?
is showing.
When we
right?
grew up together, it rubbed off a little bit on him.
Well, I'm a Jew. I always wanted to be Italian.
Well, there we go.
You know, but the fact of the matter is that, you know, I don't really consider myself a conservative, right? And I always used to tell people, look, I will absolutely give accolades to any politician, regardless of political party, that takes a stance in favor of true constitutional constructionalism. Okay, that could be a pro stance on the Second Amendment. That could be a pro stance on the Fourth Amendment. That could be a pro stance on the First Amendment. The factionalism means nothing to me. Okay, all I want is an individual to sit there and say, this is what the Constitution was created to address, and it still makes sense.
And
Okay,
to reiterate what that is the Constitution is simply designed to do one thing: protect the people's rights. My rights, your rights, his rights, her rights, everyone's rights. That's the job of government. That's what it's instituted to do. That's what it's founded for. Rights don't come from the government. They come from God, and the government's there to protect them from anybody who would infringe, including itself.
Yep. And somebody, again, regardless of political persuasion, that articulates that viewpoint, baby, I am going to support you all day long, and I'm going to call you out for accolades. Along the same lines, if you are a putative conservative and you say something that's contrary to the Constitution, I'm going to call you out on that. Okay. So when I see groups of people that self-identify as liberals, okay, that are buying guns and doing things like that, you know, I may question the support of the political party that they're voting for, because that party is doing its best to restrict their access to gun rights. Okay. But irrespective of that one position, the Second Amendment doesn't have a purity test attached to it. Okay. The Fourth Amendment to the Constitution doesn't first ask the question, is the individual a member of this particular political party? Right. The First Amendment doesn't sit there and say, well, free speech is guaranteed to all Democrats, or free speech is guaranteed to all Republicans, right? It doesn't work that way. So the fact that there happens to be this group of liberals that are going out and buying guns and starting to train, rock on, okay? As long as you are supporting the Second Amendment. You don't support the Second Amendment. Look, Rob Pincus, okay? Rob frickin' Pincus essentially puts out a statement that he endorses gun control. All right, he's dead to me. All right. I mean, the guy happens to be a really, really good gun trainer. He's been an advocate in the Second Amendment for community for years. But the fact of the matter is, he's essentially sat there and said, the Constitution is a document that, you know, will fit my needs at my time. That's unacceptable to me. I don't really care whether or not you've been an ally for the past or not. You could have even been on the other side of the aisle if you suddenly become Villanueva, right? Villanueva. Now, I don't think that he's entirely a Second Amendment advocate, but you know what? Let's call it for what it is. The dude just gave, you know, Jonathan a permit. He deserves the credit for, regardless of what motivated him to do it. Sheriff gave a permit to a guy in LA County.
What's even killer is he did that in the face of Young versus Hawaii.
Yeah.
They told him he didn't have to if he didn't want to.
Yeah.
He did.
So, you know, I mean, the fact is, when I see individuals, regardless of political persuasion, acting in concert with the Constitution, here.
You were mentioning about the enforcement. I think one of the first things Biden did was add 200 law enforcement people to ATF.
But just to ATF, and ATF. So you got to remember that 99% of the enforcement actions that ATF agents take are against FFLs. They're not against the regular public. It does happen from time to time.
But you can change that, though. You're talking about as far as who's going to do it. You go and fatten their ranks up. They go into states and do what they want to do. So
yeah, but think about it. 200 agents. You've got 350 million guns in the United States.
No, but yeah, I would think you'd probably have the authority with with a executive action to kick that number from 200 up to 20,000 or something.
Yeah, if they can get the individuals to do it, or unless they go
Yeah.
to governments via the UN.
Oh, boy.
Yeah,
Let's
there
not
you
even talk
go.
about that. We
There
haven't
you
even touched on some
go.
of the big pressing
Yeah.
issues.
So guys, we'll try to get Stephen to answer some of these questions and maybe put it up somewhere, either on a page, or we'll send it out to you guys as a follow-up email. I know I could not get to all of your questions, and I apologize tonight. Tonight was a little challenging. Guys, anything?
I think
No,
we're good.
I think we're
All right.
good.
Thank you guys for joining us.
Farewell
Thank
and
you.
good night. And remember,
We'll see you in about a quarter.
we used to say,
Yeah.
Train-
Train
Thank you,
constantly,
Stephen
train
and Cosmo.
consistently, train
Thank you, guys.
responsibly, and train with purpose.
good evening, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Andy.
All right, guys, have a good night.